أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقال رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أما بعد. We've got to the point where Muhammad sallallahu performs the what we call the Hijjatu Al-Wadāʿ, which is the farewell pilgrimage. The whole point about the farewell pilgrimage is that, so a couple of things you need to understand. Everyone knew, if we look back at the whole life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, everything built itself up to the final point of really putting the icing on the cake when it comes to delivering Islam to the Ummah. And the farewell pilgrimage was really the last point. So interestingly enough, when you look at all the rules in Islam, this Hajj was almost like the last piece of the 5 pillars that was made obligatory. So we're talking 10th year after Hijrah. So that means he's almost now completed 23 years of his life, right? So 13 years in Mecca, 10 years now in Medina. So we're 23 years coming up towards the end. And it was in this year, the 10th after Hijrah, is when the obligation of Hajj was enforced. So if you do remember that Muhammad sallallahu had sent Abu Bakr Siddiq prior to this to do the pilgrimage as well, but that was to clear the path for Muhammad sallallahu, because a lot of people ask the question, why did he not perform the pilgrimage in the 9th year after Hijrah? It was not befitting for the Prophet to go to Mecca to do this, because even though the people became Muslims there, people were still engrossed in a lot of Jahiliyyah. People were still performing Hajj with the habits and the amalgamation of the polytheist religions or their traditions. Very similar to the way we perform maybe our weddings, with the integration of Hindu elements, the way we do even some of our worship with the integration of other religions. We don't have a pure element of it. So Muhammad sallallahu wanted to make sure he cleared the pathway. He wanted to make sure that everything was absolutely 100% clear in terms of his pathway. So why Muhammad sallallahu did not perform the Hajj in the year before? Because even though everyone became Muslims in Makkah, they were still performing Hajj in a method which was contradictory to Islam. So for example, people were still dancing around the Kaaba naked. There were elements in which we'll talk about. When they go to Mina, you'll notice, for the people who went to Hajj, if you go to Mina, you camp there and then you make your way to Arafah. What the Quraysh used to do, and the Quraysh, remember, who are the Quraysh? The Quraysh are the descendants of Hazrat Ismail. So this is the family, right? The extended family of Muhammad sallallahu. Because the Quraysh believed that they were special, because they were the progeny of Ismail, they believed that in Mina they would go to a place just on the border of Arafah. There's a mountain that they will stay there, and they say that's as far as we go. Everyone else has to go to Arafah except for us, because we are the elite. So these are the kind of traditions that they still had in place. So Muhammad sallallahu had sent, prior to that year, the 9th Hijrah, Abu Bakr Siddiq and Hazrat Ali. And Hazrat Ali was given a full set of instructions to tell the people, and there were 4 instructions that were given. Number 1, that people were not to perform the tawaf around the Kaaba naked. Number 2, no more polytheists, non-Muslims were allowed to enter into Makkah from this day onwards. And number 3, that any sort of agreements that were made with the kuffar, with the polytheists, any of those agreements will be honored until they expired, and that will be it. There will be no more. So once that was instilled, then the following year, then the order came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you now perform the Hajj. So what had happened was Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Medina had announced to everyone that we are now going to perform Hajj. And then when people heard that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was going to Hajj, can you imagine that all of the local towns, all of the Bedouins from all the area, from Najd, from Hijaz, in Medina, outside of Medina, all gathered up. And we're talking about 100,000 Muslims joined up with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to perform this Hajj. And this would be the only Hajj that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would actually perform. So a couple of things that people should keep in mind when it comes to, the Hajj and the Umrah element of this. This Hajj in itself was also called the Hijjatu Al-Wadāʿ, which means the message of the pilgrimage. And the reason why, because in this particular one, everyone knew the signals were there, and Muhammad SAW clearly knew this was the last pilgrimage that he would perform, because the umrahs he performed before were 4 altogether, including this one. 4 umrahs that he performed. Okay, the first umrah he done was, if you remember, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. So he had the intention to go with the Muslims into Mecca, and this was the time when Mecca was controlled by the Quraysh, the polytheists, and they forbid him from coming in. There was this whole issue, and then the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was done. So they were in the ihram, and therefore his umrah was permitted even though he didn't enter. The second one was the Umrah al-Qadha, which was the retaliation umrah. So that was when he was then permitted on the second year to enter, and he performed the pilgrimage. He performed the umrah in Makkah, and that's when the Quraysh, if you remember Abu Sufyan and people like the Iqra bin Abu Jahl, they went to the mountaintops because they didn't want to see Muhammad SAW performing his Islamic pilgrimage in their city, but that deal was done. So that was the second one. The third one was the after Taif, when he had conquered Taif. So he conquered Makkah, then he conquered Taif, and he returned back to Makkah and he performed the Umrah there. And that was his number 3. And the fourth one was this one, where he basically had, they said that he'd done this Umrah also in this pilgrimage. So a few things that you need to understand about this pilgrimage. So Muhammad SAW used this to perform many sermons, because Muhammad SAW knew this was it. This was the last part. He knew that this was the end of his life, the end of his message, and that he had to give the last message and as many messages. So there was not. So you remember, if you go to Hajj, you go to Masjid al-Nimra, for example, and everybody goes to listen to khutbah there. That was one or maybe 4 or 5 khutbahs that were done. There was a khutbah done in Mina, there was a khutbah done in Arafah, there was a khutbah done in Nimra, there was a khutbah done in various places. So there are certain parts of the things that are performed in Hajj which are not necessarily what we call the rukn, are the pillars of the Hajj. They can be done or they don't have to be done. Okay, and there are things which can be performed. So when we go through the Seerah, in particular this book, there's about 300 pages of the details of how the Hajj is performed. Hence, when you go to Hajj, you'll find people say, oh no, you can't do this, you can do this. You can't do this, or you've got to cut your hair before you sacrifice an animal. You've got to sacrifice the animal, then cut your hair, then you've got to do. So people will give you orders and procedures. And that's the best that we get from the Sunnah. But when you actually go into the details, there's various opinions and differences when you look at the Hadith or the Sahaba. Because you remember, if 100,000 people go with Muhammad SAW, how many Sahabi are recording the events of what's happened and what they have seen and what they've heard? So therefore, there is so much variations in the views about how Hajj is actually performed. So in this, the obligation was made in the end of the 9th year after Hijrah. So if you imagine that Hajj is towards the last year, then after Hajj was performed, then the order came for the obligation. So at the end of the 9th year, so after the month of Hajj, then the order of obligation became, and therefore Muhammad SAW did it in the 10th year after Hijrah, if that makes sense. That was the year that he performed the Hajj. So he made the announcement, 100,000 people gathered up, and they got ready, and he dressed himself in his ihram, perfumed himself, etc., and had himself ready, and at the point when he was in his ihram. So the most famous hadith, there are hundreds of hadith in regards to the whole Hajj, but the most famous one is the hadith of Jabri bin Abdullah. So Jabri bin Abdullah was the nephew of Muhammad SAW, and the detail of his hadith is quite explanatory about what happens. So Muhammad Sallam's objective here was to go to the Hajj to notify people about the fact that, and it wasn't just about how to perform the Hajj, but he was giving people the advice about what you are to do with your life. I've been sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to order you, to command you, to guide you to the truth so that you will achieve paradise. Wherever this world will throw you, Muhammad Sallam was here to guide all of us and tell us what we need to do. To basically make everything clear, what your rizq is, what your life is, how it's constructed, the viewpoints, and where you're going to end up finally. And he used this to remind the people even about the fitna that is going to occur after his death. that people are going to lose their Islam, that people will fight each other, people will apostatize, people will leave Islam, they'll come out. And many people have already left, they don't even realize they've left. And he's warned us about all of these things. And therefore to stay very close. And if we get an opportunity, we'll cover some of those sermons. So the hadith of Jabri ibn Abdullah said that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he remained in Medina for 9 years without performing any Hajj. And then the announcement came to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the revelation, and he called upon the people that we are going to perform the Hajj. So large numbers of people gathered, and we're talking about 100,000 people. So he traveled for 5 days from Medina up until when he approached Mecca, and he was in his ihram. So he reached a town which is just outside of Medina, which is Dhul Hulayfa, where he performed his salah. He mounted his camel, and from this point is where he started to call the tarbiyah, which is Labaik Allahumma Labaik, here I come Allah, here I come Allah, and they're praising Allah. So this is where the talbiyah then gets performed at this point. And so they started this. So when Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam performed, so when he prepared himself, he tended to oil his hair, he put on an izar, which is one waist wrapper, one clothing on top, and then he forbid people from wearing any garments that had been stained with saffron specifically, because when you put saffron on in your ihram and it touches your skin, that's what is not permitted. So you're allowed to put it on the clothing, but make sure it doesn't touch the skin. So he prayed Zuhr in Medina, and then he left, and Asr at Dhul Hulayfa. And at this point, he prayed 2 rakats. So there's another interesting fiqh point here is, at which point do you then shorten your prayer, right? So Dhul Hulayfa isn't 40 kilometers or isn't 80 kilometers. It's just outside of Medina. So again, the point here is, let's not restrict Islam to just 1 or 2 opinions. The views of understanding of Islam is much more open, and people need to understand that by reading the Seerah. So Muhammad sallallahu, the most beautiful thing about Muhammad sallallahu was the simplicity that he applied to going to Hajj, and there's many good advice that he gave. And Jabri ibn Abdullah, he explained that how Muhammad sallallahu, that he rode on a very tattered saddle, which beneath it was just a cloth. So he humbled himself. So he said, Muhammad sallallahu, he said that it is to be a pilgrimage devoid of eye service or reputation seeking. So it almost kind of defeats the purpose. Many years when I used to go to Hajj, and people used to go, no, I'm only going to travel first class because it's more comfortable. And if I get there, I know that if you go to Mina, for example, you can get a position closer to the Jamarat, so you don't have to walk so much. They'll provide you with a king-size bed, air conditioning. They give you all of this. And people used to go with their best clothing. People used to go on the best transports and everything. And here, Muhammad sallallahu used to go on the tattered saddle with the cloth underneath, and he used to ride a camel, because there are 2 types of camels. There's riding camel, and there's something called a baggage camel. So these baggage camels are camels that are worn out, and all they do is they carry huge amounts of baggages. He took one of them. And then Muhammad sallallahu used to say to the Sahabi that, remember, this Hajj is devoid of eye service or reputation seeking. The whole objective is every man is equal. Every man and woman that performs the Hajj is equal in the eyes of Allah. And the reason why you wear the ihram, because it's 2 pieces of cloth. It doesn't have Prada written on it. It doesn't have Gucci written on it. It's not embroidered with anything. It's simple. It's tattered. And when you can have a CEO of Microsoft, and you can have a guy who picks up bins, on a weekly basis, from Slough, town. They're all equal in the eyes of Allah. That's all Allah cares about. He doesn't care about your reputation. Dunya means nothing to him. And the reason why? Because if you've got money and you've got wealth and you've got reputation, who gave it to you? Allah. So let's say, what did you do to get it? I gave it to you. Right? So irrelevant. So why are you coming with this now to me? And this is why Muhammad taught us this aspect. So even Anas, so one of the Sahabi, Thumama, related, Anas rode away on Hajj on a decrepit old saddle, and he was not stingy. So and being stingy meaning that he would not, of course he would ride himself in a decent camel, but he wasn't a stingy person, yet he rode on a very decrepit saddle, and he related that Muhammad sallallahu used to do this, riding on a baggage camel. So again, it's not about being tight, it's about remember where you're going and how you want to present yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Anas also reported that Rasulullah sallallahu went on Hajj on a worn out saddle, and cloth that was worth or not worth even more than 4 dirhams, which is nothing, right? It's almost like giveaway clothes, right? That's how much he spent on that. And he said, "Oh Allah, let it be a Hajj which is devoid of eye service." So we see that there was many hadiths in regards to how you present yourself in front of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sorry, in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Hajj itself. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he prays his Zohar at Medina, 4 rakat, and he makes his way to Dhul Hulayfa, and then prays his 2 rakat in Asr, and he spends 5 days traveling up until he gets to Mecca. So Muhammad sallallahu never enters into Mecca whilst he is tired. So he always camps outside, rests the night, and then enters Mecca, because Mecca is a holy city. It is a place to worship Allah. One should not be tired. One should be fresh and actively prepared to do the worship. And so Muhammad entered into Mecca on a Saturday, where he would be there in the morning, and then he would perform his Hajj, or he performed the Umrah that he started off with. So he would enter in, he would kiss the stone, he would perform the 3 circuits jogging, and then the 4 circuits, then he would walk the 4 circuits. After that, he would go to the station of Makkah Ibrahim. There he would pray his 2 sunnah. Okay. After performing the 2 sunnah, he went back to the Kaaba and he kissed the stone again, and then he made his way to Safa al-Marwa, where he performed the 7 circuits. Every time he went from one end to the other, he would face the Kaaba and he would make a dua. And then he would go, and when he gets to the middle part, he would jog. Now remember that the whole point of Safa al-Marwa and the Hajj has got nothing to do with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a prophet bringing this new element into his religion. These Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is doing as a respect, and that Allah ordered him, you do it as a respect from your father Ibrahim Islam, because it was Ibrahim Islam that introduced Hajj. Who did the Safa Marwa? Who ran between the 2 mountains? It was his mother Hajar, the mother of Ismail, when Ibrahim Islam had left his wife in Makkah, which was barren land, 2,000 years before even Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam even existed. And she did this Safa Marwa because she was looking for help. She struggled because her son was suffering. There was no food, they were left, and she went back and forward. And with her patience and with her sabr and with her thankfulness, then Allah Ta'ala produced the water from the feet of Ismail when he was a baby, which became the Zamzam. So this is why Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam done this. Now what was interesting was at this point, when after the 7th part of doing the circuit, when he finished that Safa Marwa, then the revelation came down, and then Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "If only I knew what I knew now," which is, he said to the people, because I brought my sacrificial camels with me, I have to stay in the state of ihram, right? So this now Hajj that he is performing is the Hajj Qiran, which means Hajj. There's 3 types of Hajj that you can perform. One is Ifrad, one is Qiran, and one is Tamattu. Ifrad is when you go with the intention just to perform Hajj. There's no Umrah, you just go in. Normally in this day and age, it's people like who are on business, who've only got a short amount of time, and they just go straight in and they perform the Hajj and they leave. Hajj Qiran is when you perform both the Umrah and the Hajj, but you do not break your Ihram. The reason why the Ihram is why it's called Ihram, because it comes from the word Haram, which means that when you're in the state of Ihram, certain things which were normally allowed for you then become haram, right? So putting perfume on, having a relationship with your wife, or destroying animals, or killing plants, or doing anything like that. Certain things which are permitted for you, hunting for example, all of these are made haram. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had the intention of performing Qiran. He was going to be in his ihram, and he was going to perform the Umrah and then go straight into Hajj. And he bought his sacrificial camels, and that was the point. And then the revelation came to him, which made it clear that actually, if you didn't bring your sacrificial camels with you, then you can come out of your ihram. And therefore he ordered the people, those who did not bring their camels to be sacrificed, because they used to bring their camels, we don't do it now, right? No one goes from here and takes camels on a PIA flight or, whatever, right? That doesn't happen. But for them, it did. So if they didn't bring their sacrificial camels, then Muhammad ordered them, then come out of your ihram. And if you come out of your ihram, now this was a shock to people because this was not the traditions that the Quraysh had taken and had twisted. So remember, Hazrat Ismail, Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam, when they established the rites of Hajj, it was implemented for hundreds of years. And the Quraysh, the children of Ismail, had implemented it. And then, like anything else, over time, we corrupt it. It's like the way we do our prayers. It's like the way we do our weddings. It's like the way we do a lot of our traditions. We have very small touches and tinges of Islam, and we have tinges of other people's religions in it. Now, for example, if you look at the weddings that we perform, wedding is just we do the nikah and we have a walima, right? A celebration. Now we do the hold, bring the milk out, bring the badam out, the nuts and this, that, what the Hindu traditions do. Now in modern day, because we're brought up in England, we do the white dress and the father walks in with the bride and then the passes it over and they stand in front. None of this to do with Islam, right? We don't even care, right? And that's the whole point. And this is exactly what they've done. They twisted their Hajj. So in their Hajj, you would come in and you would stay in your ihram until the end. That's how it would work. So when Muhammad said, come out of your ihram, they said, are you sure? So Surah ibn Malik was the one who looked at him and said, are you sure that we come out? Are you saying to me that we can come out of our ihram and then everything becomes halal, like even our relationship with our wives, which is forbidden while you're in your ihram and other things? And he said, yes. And the reason why they did that, Allah Ta'ala wanted to break the traditions of the Quraysh. So some of the people in this Hajj, some people perform the ifrad, some people perform the qiran, which Muhammad did, but the one that Muhammad said, that was one that I wish I knew about, wish I knew what I did not know before, was the tamattu, which is you come and you do your umrah, and as soon as you do your umrah, you come out your ihram, right? And then basically everything is allowed for you, and then when the time of Hajj comes, then you get back into ihram. Understand? So there's three: ifrad, qiran, and tamattu. So Muhammad did the qiran. So we know that recommended one is the tamattu. Any three you can do. There's no issues with that. So Muhammad remained in this, and we know that Hazrat Ali was coming from Yemen, and Muhammad had ordered Ali to bring 100 camels for sacrificial, to do to sacrifice as part of the Hajj. So these camels were then bought, and we know that because when Hazrat Ali came, and he walked in, and his wife, Hazrat Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, she was there. And when he came into Makkah and he went to the tent of his wife, she was out of her ihram, she had the mascara on, and she was perfumed. And Hazrat Ali became angry. He goes, what are you doing? You're supposed to be in your ihram. And she said, no, my father said that if we didn't bring our sacrificial camels, that we should come out of our ihram and we'll go back into it when the Hajj starts. And so Hazrat Ali went to see Muhammad and said to him, is this true? He said, well, what intention did you make? He said, I said labaik and on the intention of the Prophet. So whatever intention you made is the intention that I made. So he ended up doing the intention of basically staying in the ihram. So Muhammad stayed in Makkah. So he was Sunday, he did the Umrah, for example. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and on Thursday, which is the eighth day of Dhul Hijjah, then they make their way to the Mina. And they get there just before Zohor time. Then they stay there and they perform their Zohor and Asr, the Maghrib and the Isha, and they combine their prayer when they're there. Then the next day is when they make their way towards Arafah. So here Muhammad would travel to there's a lot of details here, so I didn't want to try and miss too much of it. So here Muhammad would go to Arafah, and there he would say to the before he entered Arafah, he asked for a tent to be made at where you see Masjid al-Nimra. And there, if you remember, at the masjid, there is actually a line. If you ever get to go on your Hajj, it's impossible. I've tried it. But actually in the masjid, there's a line, which is the border outside of Arafah. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam got to there. He did his sermon, and then just when Zohar began, then he stepped over and then went to Arafah. And there another tent was made for him, and there in Arafah he then made his sermon, which I'll read through anyway later on. After doing that, then he made his way to the Mount of Mercy, right? There, if you notice, this here people will go to this mountain and they will climb it. There's all sorts of theories about what this mountain is. So some people say this mountain of mercy in Arafah is where, when Adam Islam was, basically removed from the heavens, he ended up in this place. Some people say this is the place where the day judgment will begin. But we know that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam went to this point on his camel, never climbed it, might went a little bit up, but he never climbed the mountain. And there he was on his camel, and there he made another sermon. Okay, so there was nothing else. Now what Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam made very clear to people is any part of Arafah is you need to be there. That's it. Okay, you don't have to go to this mountain, go anywhere. These are just additional. They're not rukns. They don't make part of your Hajj either. Okay, and it's not even considered to be sunnah either. So any part where you are in Arafah is acceptable, and this is what Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had done. So just to talk about the sermon that he did in the valley of Urena, here Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he did some really nice sermons to the people, where he would give them a lot of reminders in regards to the way that people should be and the way that they act. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's talked about how he talked about the relationship between people and the blood relationships between these people, and all of the jahliyyah that existed between the polytheists and all the traditions that they had. And so Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would say to these people that on this day, that people who fight each other, the blood that they spill, all of this now should be eradicated. The racism that exists, because the Arabs used to be very racist, that every white, every black person is equal, every rich person, every poor person is equal. And Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam really stressed about the two weakest people of society that he said that should be protected, because people used to abuse them. One was the slave, and the second were the women. That even in if you look at the Western world, it was only up until the 1970s, 80s is the women started to get their rights, and only recently. But this Islam gave women their rights a long time ago. But in the time of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was no rights for the women. There was no inheritance for them. There was nothing for them. So here, even Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is ordering the people that make sure that you protect them in your society, in your community. And then he talked about people apostatizing, leaving Islam, that making sure that you do not fight each other, that you support each other, and be very careful about people influencing you. That even shaitan, if he tries to encourage you to go towards kufr and you've taken that path, don't think that just because you're Muslim you are safe. The shaitan has many other avenues of bringing you away from Islam and into sin. And that, so here Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was giving a lot of these khudbars. So here one of them, here he says, "Oh Allah, you do indeed hear my speech and see where I am, and you know both what I keep inside of me as a secret and what I outwardly show to the people. Nothing of mine is hidden from you. I am poor and needy to you. I ask for your help and I seek your refuge. I am frightened and fearful of you and your punishment." This is amazing how Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying, I am fearful of you and your punishment. Why is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam thinking about punishment? He's a prophet. Because Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam understands what Allah is from that sense. That even Allah Ta'ala, if He wants to, He can punish everyone, even a prophet. Even though this is what not Allah will do. But Allah Ta'ala has the right to change His mind whenever He wants. But that's not what Allah Ta'ala is going to do. So as a poor person, I ask you, and as a humble sinner, I ardently supplicate to you. I supplicate to you in the way of someone who is fearful and blind supplicates. In the way a person supplicates, who submits his neck to you, who cries profusely for you, who humbles his body before you, and who humbles his nose on the ground during prostration for you. O Allah, O my Lord, you do not make me unhappy in regard to my supplication to you. Please answer my prayers and be compassionate, gracious, and merciful to me. O you who are the best among those who are asked and the best among those who give. And so here is when, and this is when Muhammad Sallallahu was at Mount Al-Rahmah, where we talked about, and he gave this sermon. And at this point, then the ayah was revealed to Muhammad Sallallahu, where Allah said, this day I have perfected your religion for you and completed my favor upon you and have chosen for you Islam as your religion. And this is when everyone knew this was the final cut. The moment Allah revealed this and Muhammad Sallallahu read this verse out, everyone cried. Everyone knew this is the end for Muhammad Sallallahu. His job is done because now Allah has perfected the religion. So this he knew, and Muhammad Sallallahu knew that this is the signal that Allah has given him that, O Messenger, I'm happy with you, I'm content with you, you have done your job. Now the rest is up to them, us. You have done your job, you have done you spread the message. Now you have done that, I'm going to hold every one of these guys accountable on the Day of Judgment. There is no excuse for them. Everything has been, there are people out there giving dawah, there are masjids there are talks on YouTube that everyone there is teaching you about Islam. But if we choose to be ignorant about it, we have no excuse on the Day of Judgment. And that was a signal. So Allah is saying, you've done your job, don't worry, now I'm holding them accountable. So the switch now has occurred. And that's where it became, people realized that we don't have Muhammad, we're not going to have him with us anymore. What if we fall short? What if we become sinners? What if we lose our deen? What if we become kuffar? What if we become sinners? Then what will we do? And so that became a real big issue for them. At this point, Muhammad Sallallahu then returns to Muzdalifah. And when he arrives at Muzdalifah, he prays his Maghrib. People haven't even unpacked. So they get there, they pray their Maghrib, and immediately after that, when people have settled, they call the Iqamah, and then they pray the Isha, and then they sleep. Then early in the morning, Muhammad Sallallahu gets up, he leaves Muzdalifah, he makes his way back towards Mina, carries on. Now there is an area that he arrives as he's traveling. You probably have seen this. I saw it when I was very close to Arafah. It's called Batn Muhasir. So Batn Muhasir is that place, if you remember the ayah, Surah Al-Fir. Yeah. So when long time ago, the grandfather Muhammad Sallallahu, Abdul Muttalib, when the Yemenis king or the leader who was a Christian, I think, a Jew Christian, who wanted to destroy the Kaaba because he built his own Kaaba that he wanted the Christians to come to worship. And so he wanted to destroy the Kaaba because many people used to come. And so he brought the elephants and a massive big army. And then this area where the birds came, they all attacked, the soldiers and the elephants, and the elephants would not move forward. This is the area where, as soon as Muhammad come here, he tied up his reins with a camel and he said, move through this area quick because this area is cursed. We talked about this in also one area of the people of Thamud. There's an area in Arabia where the people of Thamud were cursed as well. And here when Muhammad said, do not eat, do not drink, do not enter their houses, do not just move from this place because the place is cursed and we don't want the curse of Allah upon us. So upon reaching Mina, the Prophet continued to ride onwards until he reached Jamarat. Now, before he left Muzdalifah, he said to Ibn Abbas, collect me 7 pebbles. So from this is where we get the order of 7 pebbles. So they all collected it. And so when he arrived at Jamarat, he then pelted the first, from his camel, he pelted the first shaitan there. Now, here then Muhammad Sallallahu returned back to Mina, and then another sermon he gave at Mina as well to the people. And so Muhammad Sallallahu here the way he used to give the sermons is that he used to try to make sure that people are giving their attention. So the way he would do it, he would always ask them questions like this. He would say to them, which city is this? And they would say, Allah and His Messenger know best. And again, he would remain silent until they thought that he was going to give Makkah a new name, because they thought that the way he was saying it, that he was going to rename Makkah. Because remember, Medina was renamed. Medina was Yathrib before. And then he renamed it to Medina. Therefore, it's haram for us to call it Yathrib. Okay, so we can't call it Yathrib at all. So he said to them, that is this not an inviolable city? They said, yes. He then said to them, verily your blood and your wealth and your honor are sacred upon you like the sacredness of this day in this month and in this city, and they will remain as such sacred until the day you meet your Lord. Have I conveyed? And here Muhammad is pushing. So here a couple of things. Number one, your blood is sacred. So protect each other. And today what do we see? We see Muslims' blood is cheap. It's so cheap. It's understandable when the kuffar come and kill the Muslims. But when you got Muslims killing Muslims, we're worth nothing. And what did Muhammad in the Hadith? He says, the blood of a Muslim is worth more than the Kaaba and all its surroundings. If Muhammad had a choice between the Kaaba and all its surroundings over the blood of one Muslim, he would choose the protection of that Muslim. And what are we now? It's just interesting to see what Muhammad is saying, what he wanted us to do, and how far the stone has been thrown from what he has said. And then he wanted to say that, have I conveyed? And he always used to say, because Muhammad used to be fearful. Remember, as a prophet, Muhammad has an order from Allah. Whatever I reveal to you, you must spread the message. So that was an individual obligation to him. So he used to always check with the people, have I conveyed? Have I told you? Be my witness that I have. So on the day of judgment, there'll be nothing against me to say that I've not conveyed my message. And they said, yes, you've conveyed your message. O Allah, bear witness, and let the one who is present here convey this message to the one who is absent. For among those to whom my message is conveyed, there may be someone who will understand what I say better than those who hear what I say firsthand. You understand my point? You could be there every day listening to an imam who's giving you the best advice, and it goes from one ear to the other. It doesn't sink into you. But then you will say it to your children. So for example, I may say to someone, you should pray 5 times a day. It is key. The prayer is the key to Jannah. It is the most fundamental law, the most fundamental act that will get you into paradise. Without the prayer, you got no chance. If you don't pray, what do we do? As fathers, as mothers, we go to our children and say, pray, 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 pray. The kids will pray, but the father will stop praying. You see? So Muhammad saying, when I give this message, it could be that you may listen and convey this message to the one who didn't hear it from me, but he may act on my message better than you, even though you heard it from me directly. And that happens all the way through in life, right? We give advice to those people, the other person gives the advice to somebody else, but some of those don't act upon them. For among those to whom my message is conveyed, there may be someone who will understand what I say better than those who hear what I say firsthand. And after I am gone, and this is where he said, please do not return to disbelief, with some of you striking the necks of others among you. And here the Prophet ﷺ was probably referring to those people who apostatized during the stages of when Abu Bakr Siddiq became Khalif, and obviously everything that happened after that point as well. So then Muhammad ﷺ made his way to Mina. There Muhammad ﷺ went to the area where they do the qurbani, the slaughter, and he proceeded to, he himself slaughtered 63 camels. So the 100 camels that Ali bought, Muhammad ﷺ slaughtered 63. Then he got tired. He says, I've done a day's work. And he said to Hazrat Ali that you complete the rest of the slaughtering. So he here, Muhammad ﷺ, did this himself. Upon completing the slaughter of the camels, the Prophet then summoned the shaver, and then he did the halq. So he shaved his head off. He shaved his hair off, and then the Prophet distributed. And here, remember, so this is an interesting thing. Anything from the Prophet Muhammad, his hair. So Abu Sufyan described that when he went to see Muhammad a long time ago, when he wanted to try and make an agreement, he was shocked to see that every time Muhammad performed wudu, people used to rush to get the water that come off his body, and they used to rub it on their face. Even the kulli that Muhammad used to do, they used to take that and rub it on their face. If the hair used to drop, they used to fight over the hair. So when Muhammad did the halq and he cut his hair, people rushed to get the hair, so he distributed his hair out. Why? It's not because Muhammad thinks himself to be special. Oh, look at me, I can hand this out. Because Allah said, O Prophet, you are barakah. You are barakah. So anything from you is barakah. There's blessing from you. So he knew that if there's barakah in me, there's blessing, he wanted to share that blessing with everyone, whatever it be. He only took the order from Allah. Going to Hajj is barakah. Earning money in a halal way is barakah. So if somebody earns money in a haram way, £100,000, halal way, £100,000. That £100,000, what they mean is you have your rizq, Allah has assigned you your rizq, you will get it. Your £100,000 regardless. You're going to achieve that money. But it's a question of barakah in that. Your £100,000 could mean nothing. In that £100,000, you might have house problems, you might have children problems, you might have illnesses that you have to pay out of your pocket, and all of a sudden that 100,000 meant nothing, just disappeared. You spent on everything. But the one who has barakah in his £100,000, all of a sudden that £100,000, he invests it, makes him more money, or that money takes him a long way. He feels that that money has given him more, and he doesn't need any more than that 100,000. So he has more weighting to it. So after that, then Muhammad sallam, he then rides from Makkah and he performs the al-Ifada Tawaf, okay? And he performed the Zoho Prayer in Makkah, and then he went to where the children of Abdul Muttalib, meaning his family, because each family, the Banu Hashim or the Banu Abdul Muttalib, then the Banu Makhzum, whatever, each one of these Quraysh have different responsibilities in Makkah. Some of them do provide the provisions for the Hajj. Some of them are in charge of the al-Nadwa, which is the parliamentary system. Some of them are in charge of the army, etc., etc. But the family of the Prophet Muhammad, the Banu Abdul Muttalib, were always given the privilege and the honor of providing food and water to the pilgrims. So he would go up to them and say to them, "Draw up water, O children of Abdul Muttalib." And he said, "Had I not feared that people would rush to take this honor from you, I would have drawn up the water alongside you." Right? So he said, because we could just take the water ourselves. But he said, this honor is yours, so you give me the water. And he wanted to give them that blessing. So then Muhammad sallam returned back to Mina that day. And that night, he returned back. And in the morning, he waited until Zuhr time, at which time he walked from the campsite back to Jamrat. And he then began with the first stoning of the shaitan, of the Jamrat, where the stone is. Then he proceeded to the middle one. There's a small, big one, and there's a third one, the last one. And there where he was at Jamra al-Aqaba, there he delivered 2 more sermons, very famous sermons that he gave again, giving people the advice. And at that point, Muhammad sallam would keep repeating things. When you know you're leaving your ummah, and you know that this is the final religion that has to now remain until the day of judgment, and this religion will be attacked from all angles for the remaining years up until the day of judgment. And you see it today. How many Muslims are left practicing? It is so sad that we can't even dig through the rubbish to really understand what the true Islam is. We end up looking at other people, other masjids, other way that people behave to make our judgment call Islam. Oh, is that what your Islam is? We don't like that. So people who practice Islam and they amalgamated it with other religions or other traditions or other culture, when a rational person looks at it, I think, that doesn't even make any sense to me. It's hard to even find the true Islam. So Muhammad sallam was so fearful of the fact that Islam will be under attack that he used to say, remember my words, learn, study, stay close to it, protect each other, be patient with each other, don't destroy each other. Because the moment you do that and you're disunited, it would be difficult to come back together again. So Muhammad sallam would always give these continuous advice. So then Muhammad sallam returned back to Mina, and there he stayed there for 3 more days of the Tashriq, and then he went to Makkah and he performed the farewell tawaf. And the moment he performed the farewell tawaf, immediately Muhammad sallam departed. So when you do the last tawaf, that's the time when you should actually leave. And that's where Muhammad sallam made his outward journey back into Medina. And there when Muhammad sallam, when he left and he was on his way, he stopped at Home Creek, which is at Al-Jufa. There he went on to give one other sort of khutbah or the sermon to the travelers that were with him. And because remember, some of the people that performed the Hajj, they were in Makkah as well, and they lived in Makkah, so they stayed there. And he said to proceed, O people, I am only a human being. I am only an insan, and the time draws near when the messenger of my Lord will come, inviting me to leave this world, and I will answer his invitation. So Allah will come to Muhammad to say to him, it's time for you to leave. And when I do this story next, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Did you know that Muhammad was given a choice by Allah, that either you can come to me, your death, your imminent death, or I give you the opportunity to stay with your ummah until the day of judgment. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. So here Muhammad is saying the messenger of my Lord will come, meaning the angel will come to me, inviting me to leave this world, inviting me, not ordering, inviting me. So he has a choice. And I will answer his invitation with an answer. And I am leaving among you two heavy things, heavy in terms of their significance or responsibility. The first of them is the book of Allah, the Quran. He then went on to say that the book of Allah, and then he said, and the people of my household, my family, I ask you to remember Allah regarding your duty towards the people of my household, and I ask you to remember Allah regarding the duty towards the people of my house. According to one, he said that whoever has me as a helper and supporter, then here too is a helper and supporter, and he had Hazrat Ali with him. Oh Allah, help those who help him and show enmity towards those who show enmity towards him. You know why he said that? There was a situation that occurred prior to the Makkah event, the Hajj event. Hazrat Ali was sent to Yemen to do some delegation work, right? And to basically do some dawah, collect some jizya tax, sadaqah, zakat, etc. He took an army with him. When they collected everything, a couple of incidents happened. There were one or two Muslims that were there that really disliked Hazrat Ali. Hazrat Ali was he was God-fearing, very straight shooter, very blunt. So when they collected, what happened was he collected the camels and he collected clothing, right, as zakat. When you collect money for zakat or sadaqah, no one has a right to touch or use it, even temporarily, because when the sadaqah is given, zakat is given, this belongs to somebody else. Imagine if somebody says to me, I have a present for Nadeem, can you give it to him? Could be a laptop or anything. And then somebody else comes along and says, oh, is that for Nadeem? You don't mind if I borrow it for a little while? I'm just going to go away and take away and do some stuff on it. That is yours. That belongs to you. It doesn't belong to the person who's asking it. And you have no right to touch it. It's that person's property, even though they've not been allocated. So when they collected these camels and these clothing, they said to Hazrat Ali, our camels are tired. Can we just borrow these camels? And he said, no, use your own or rest your camels. Then because they traveled so far and clothing was collected, it was Yemeni's clothing was like Gucci clothing, right? That's how popular they were. And when they saw these clothing, they said, we traveled so far, can we at least borrow these clothing or take these clothing so that we can wear it? And he said, no. And they started hating on Hazrat Ali. So they said, we will go back to Prophet Muhammad, we're going to make a complaint about him. So they went to see Muhammad, and that's where they started making complaint. And Muhammad said to these people that those who hate Ali hate me. And this is to his family, that his family have been blessed. His daughters, his cousins, Jafar ibn Abu Talib, Hazrat Ali, everyone in his family have been blessed. And we know that because Allah Ta'ala has given them their blessing and they haven't done any wrong. And he said to those people, if you hate on him, you hate on me. So please respect my family. And he's talking about those who do righteousness, right? The people who do righteousness in this. So this was a very important side. So here, just kind of like ending off on this part of the final pilgrimage. There's a lot of details on it. To be honest, if I was to do this would probably be about 6 hours lecture because it goes into a lot of detail. But this is something that you should kind of read upon yourself. But the main purpose of this is it wasn't just the Hajj and to allow people to understand how the Hajj is performed and the varied opinions which is acceptable. Because I'll give you another example. People came to Muhammad sallam. Yeah, have you ever had this when you go to Hajj? And by accident, I think I might have done this as well. You're supposed to do the qurbani first and then shave your head. And sometimes people shave their head first and forgot to do the qurbani. And they say, right, you have to pay, dam on this one. You have to pay money, right, penalty on this. And they went to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They said to Ya Rasul, we did the halq before we did the qurbani. He goes, no problem. Now go do the qurbani. There's no sin on you. We did this before this. No problem. Now go perform that. You see the easiness of it, and we make it very, very, very difficult. We make it very, very difficult. And this is, when you study Islam, Allah is very merciful. The only thing in Hajj, which is the rukn, which is without it, there is no Hajj, is Arafah. You can do all the others. If you don't do Arafah, there's no Hajj. Arafah is Hajj. That's the bit that you need to make. You understand? So besides teaching them the pilgrimage and finalizing and then basically closing out the social system of the kuffar, the rest were just pure reminders. And it was a signal for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the rest of the ummah, this is the end. This will be the end, and now the final is coming. Assalamu alaikum.